Welcome to the Aim and Practice podcast. I'm your host, Jess Reynolds, and on this podcast, we explore the world of integrative and complementary medicine and its application in real-world clinical practice. Each episode, we dive deep into conversation with practitioners, authors, thought leaders, and innovators who are shaping the future of holistic healthcare. Now, today, I am chatting with Josh Satterlee. He's a chiropractor by trade and the founder of Trust-Driven Care, a software company revolutionizing patient communication in healthcare. Now, Josh brings a very unique perspective to the intersection of patient care, trust building, and modern technology in the healthcare industry. So in today's episode, you will learn the importance of trust in healthcare and how it really impacts patient outcomes, how to effectively communicate with patients before, during, and after their visits, the role of automation and customer relationship management or CRM systems in the healthcare practice, strategies for improving patient experience and building long-term relationships, and the 3 key skills that make a healthcare practitioner successful: diagnosis, treatment, and of course, communication. So with that, let's dive into our conversation with Josh and explore how trust-driven care and effective communication can truly transform your practice and improve your patient outcomes. You might already be familiar with the name, but if this is new to you, Jane is a PIP-EDA or PIPEDA compliant clinic management software and EMR, and the sponsor of today's show. Chasing down patients or clients for important information, well, it isn't anybody's idea of a good time, especially when there are forms to be filled, payments to be processed, and consents to be collected. That's why Jane has designed a user-friendly online intake form so you can gather all this information and anything else you need ahead of the appointment, whether that's health history, insurance details, or credit card information to keep on file. Jane will even send a friendly reminder 24 hours before the patient's appointment if they haven't completed their intake form yet, saving you from having to manually follow up. To see Jane in action, click the link in the show notes to book a personalized demo, or if you're ready to get started, you can use the code AIM1MO at the time of sign up for a 1-month grace period applied to your new account. Josh, thanks a lot for taking the time to chat with me. I was going through some of your stuff that you posted online, particularly looking at one of the webinars that you did for Jane. And it was so fascinating because I'm like super deep in the process of creating a workshop for a conference down in Florida. And I just finished it off, I'm practicing it, and then I watch your webinar that you did in 2021, and I'm like, what? This is almost the same conversation. The overlap was absolutely astonishing.
I've had that exact same experience. I've had many times where I've sketched out an idea, I've talked to my friends about an idea, and then I remember one time I was getting on a plane, and I bought an Outside magazine, and I go about halfway through the magazine, and I open it up, and there's my idea that I told my friends was like, you know, what'd be awesome is this new and novel thing. And it's like, yeah, not so new and novel. It's not an Outside magazine, you know, yeah. Heartbroken.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. But I think in our case, it's a pretty good thing because the topics that both you and I talk about, I mean, your take on it is certainly different than mine, which I really appreciate. But I'm glad that there's such a big overlap because the things that we do talk about aren't being spoken of. Right. And that's really what I'm looking forward to talking to you about today is trust and communication.
Absolutely. And the other thing to think about is if you tell every single person and you sign up every single customer and I do the same, we'll still just be barely scratching the surface with only North American healthcare probably. You know what I mean? Like we're not even affecting the globe.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, well, I'm not sure if we want to start with trust or communication because there's basically such a profound overlap. But one of the things that I was looking at, maybe we can dig into this, is the software company that you run, which it's called Trust-Centered Care, right?
Close. Trust-Driven Care.
Trust-Driven Care. Sorry about that. Yeah. Brilliant name. And let's talk about that, like the inception behind that and the name and what exactly you do with it.
Yeah. Well, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to tell a story because that's where the name came from. So a few years ago now, just before COVID, I think it was around like 2019, I had a friend named Ryan, and he called me and he said, hey, I have some back pain. What do you think I should do? And for those listening, I'm a chiropractor by trade. Treating low back pain is That's the thing we do, right? Low back pain, neck pain, that's like what chiropractors are known for. And I had a really good relationship with Ryan. And so he was just looking for some direction. I said, well, go to your local chiropractor. He lived a few hundred miles away from me. So he went, and, things were kind of a little bit better, but not really. Then he went to, I said, well, maybe you need rehab. Go to a physical therapist. So he went to a physical therapist. Then he went back to a different chiropractor. Then he went to, he got some massages in there. He went to an urgent care at one point to get some meds. He went to a orthopedic specialist who said, oh, this is a hip problem. This isn't even a back problem. You're just getting referral pain. Get an MRI of the hip and blah, blah, blah. Went back to his primary care. In the end, he ended up going to 7 different doctors, right? 7 different doctors. Yeah. So diligent in pursuing, whatever you want to say, like different courses, different approaches, different thoughts. So he went to 7 different doctors, and the 7th one is listening to him. And he said, which he had said to previous doctors, but this person picked it up. He said, yeah, it's really weird. I've just been in so much pain. I can't eat lately. And that's probably why I've lost like 30 pounds in the last month. And, I've been taking so much ibuprofen. That probably explains why there's like red blood in my stool. Right. And, I feel great when I'm here, but when I lay down at night, I can't get out of pain. I just have tons of pain at night. Right. And if anybody listening knows, those are red flags. I mean, blatant red flags for cancer, right? Like that is textbook. We're all trained in that. We know that well. But what was interesting to me is I was like, Ryan, why didn't you tell anybody this, And he said, I did, or there wasn't really time, or I didn't want to slow them down. Like they were nice people. I know they're busy. I didn't want to slow them down with this. I'm sure it's fine. And that 7th doctor ended up ordering an MRI of his low back and abdomen. And within that, there was stage 4 colon cancer that had metastasized to his spine, the bones of his spine, the muscles of his spine, and had in fact penetrated his acetabulum, basically, hence the hip symptomatology. Unfortunately, by the time this happened, it was stage 4 metastasized. I mean, there's not a chapter 2 to that story. So he passed away about 7 weeks later. And it really dug into me. I was like, if the first person had caught this, could he have maybe gotten discovered at stage 2? I mean, this is like a 7-month travel, maybe 8 months of care, right? And so I sat there and I was like, where the hell did this go wrong? Like, this guy he's smart. He's well-spoken. He's a nice guy. He's not speaking a second language. I mean, like sometimes we get patients, they're speaking Spanish or Portuguese or Chinese, and we're English speakers, or vice versa. And he had none of those problems. And so it was like a microcosm of what goes wrong in healthcare, right? And I'm like, what the hell happened here? So I had a couple more conversations with me, and one thing that's kind of stuck out in my conversations with him before he passed was like this idea that a patient, a well-educated, well-spoken patient, has this idea like, oh, that I don't want to slow Jess down. I don't want to inconvenience you. And on the same regard, talking to him, he would say like, well, I just didn't know them well enough to tell him that. I didn't want to tell him that I had blood in my stool, like it's embarrassing. And I'm like, oh my God, Ryan, like had we known this early, we could have done something, right? Well, as I tell you those things, like if they think you're busy, they don't want to encumber you, they're embarrassed to tell you, I'm like, what's the core issue here? The core issue is not what type of MRI we order. The core issue is we in the model of medicine have set up the situation where our patients don't trust us on that first visit, right? And to give us some, this is a crazy idea, but remember in healthcare, we have a crazy social situation that we have to overcome, which is when do we ask those red flag questions? It's on the first visit in the first 5 minutes. You can't come up with another social interaction where you ask the most difficult, pressing, high trust questions at the early part, right? Like if you're on a date, you don't start your first date in the first 5 minutes before bread's even been dropped off on the table and say, real quick before we go, are you currently addicted to any illicit drugs, and how many times have you declared bankruptcy just before we start, right? But that's essentially what we have to do in healthcare. We can't wait till the 7th visit to ask, hey, listen, is there any numbness in your genitals? Do you have any incontinence? All these red flags. And so I was like, well, crap. Like, how do we overcome that? We have to ask we have to ask high trust questions in our low trust environment, right? So I think, how are we going to do that? And I look in the research, I go to PubMed and start just burning through research because Ryan had just passed away, and I was just bothered, like looking at all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm going to find the answer here. And there were certain things like, patients, report a higher level of trust when they spend 25 minutes discussing their history with a doctor. I'm like, that obviously, that's great. And I wish that the model was set up for that. That's obviously a university hospital where there's no billing going on, because I don't know any provider that could spend 25 minutes just in the verbal history portion of their first visit, right? Do you know any? I can't think of a single profession where that's acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, well, that's a stupid ass answer. Like, yeah. That, also, if we were Thor with the body of Thor and with the mind of Stephen Hawking, yes, we could figure this problem out. But how about for us mere mortals, in ones that are working for a living? And so I started looking at it, and where were the disconnects that at least were reported in peer-reviewed evidence in peer-reviewed journals, and then kind of taking that and classifying it and saying, okay, the research is telling us what the problem is. The research doesn't tell us any solutions, right? And it bothered me, man. I'm like, what? Like, okay, I have 70 different articles that say yes, there is a problem, and none of those offer a solution. And I'm like that's so frustrating. So anyways, so then I zoomed out and I said, okay, well, this is a problem of trust, and how do other industries deal with trust? So think like, obviously you want to trust your banker, right? Like, you're not going to drop off money to some sketchy place. You're like, are you guys going to be around next week? And they're like, yeah, it's fine. And there's always those kind of discussions about like buying a used car, right? Like a used car salesman, like, I would never lie to you. You could trust me. Those are red flags for you cannot trust me, and I would lie to you. And you just think about any environment where there's a high level of trust, right? And what is one of the ways we ensure that? And so I looked at, okay, let's take these lessons from places that already do it. And probably the area that builds up trust really well and has really investigated it is like sales and marketing. Because if I want you to buy something from me, if I want you to buy a car and you don't trust me, I know right away when you say no to the sale, right? Or if I say like, hey, this financing rate's the best you're going to get. If you trust me, you'll sign up for it. If you don't, I'm going to go look at other options. So I took that. I took other information that Google published and companies like Salesforce. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They're a big technology company, but all these different ones, and said, okay, well, they've handled the practical side, but they don't know why they're doing it. They just know that it works, right? And I'm looking at the medical side and saying, here's the problem. And so we just kind of combine those. And in the end, the way that you build trust to have that patient that comes in and is totally honest in that first visit is the same way as if I'm a financial planner, I get you to invest your $1 million of savings, and it's established trust before you step in the office. That's really a solution, right? And if we go, great, that's what we need to do. How do we do that? And the only way I know of that is scalable and possible for healthcare providers is you got to diligently communicate before that person physically shows up or hits start on the Zoom call if you're doing telehealth, right? And unfortunately, I don't. I up to that point, I didn't. Most of the providers I know didn't. Right? We don't focus on what we're doing, and systems like EHRs and everything are not built to have that approach, right? So then I was like, all right, well, I'm not going to sit here and just say, well, throw up my hands. Like, it could have been great. So we just said, let's find a software that does it, right? So we tried building our own and spent $106,000 and got almost nothing, and then we kind of found, it's not great. We we found some kind of off-the-shelf solutions that kind of did well, kind of wrapped them up, and then said, this can do communication, but it's not an EHR. Who's the best EHR? And I was using Jane in my practice at the time, and I'm like, all right, we're gonna work to integrate as best we can with Jane, right? Get the two systems to talk, and that's what we set about doing. So that's what became what you know as trust-driven care.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that story, and I always love it when a solution to a problem is heart-centered. It comes from, in your case, knowing a guy who has a pretty tragic story, but simultaneously, the fact that you're in such a unique position also as a care provider to see the problem for what it is and then doggedly investigate that until eventually you come up with this solution. That's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks.
And I would agree that the communication before the session, like that's virtually unheard of because nobody teaches it in school. Like you said, none of the EMR systems are set up for it. People find us through, referrals, sure, word of mouth. That tends to be the biggest for a lot of people. Maybe you've got ads going on, and that type of communication, it's good enough to build trust enough to drink this brand of pop or whatever. But to, like you said, walk into the door and immediately be like, here's all the most intimate, embarrassing things that I actually won't even tell my significant other. So brilliant. I like that. So when you start this conversation now, prior to them coming in, how do you start to build the level of trust required in order to really get into those red flag conversations much sooner? So how does the software build that relationship and that trust?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say that there's not a single answer to every situation. I'm a chiropractor. You're an acupuncturist. We probably do 90% of the same stuff all day, but I don't know exactly how it goes, right? And but here's some, if I were saying, so let's take you clinically, like if you think about the last patient you treated, what happened before they stepped foot in your office is worth looking at. So here's an easy test. Tell your grandmother to meet you at your office, and you cannot call her on her phone or send a picture. Can she get to your office? That's my test, right? Because what you're going to find out, she's like, Jess, it's your grandma. I don't know where to park. Then that tells you should solve the parking issue before your patient runs into it. Because if they start running into roadblocks before they step foot, they're just not going to be honest with you. But I use this example. If you were a personal trainer, right? And let's say that you have a 45-year-old woman that says, hey, my daughter's getting married in 2 years. I've never worked out my entire life. I've never run. I've never done anything. I want to work out with you. And you put her through a killer workout on day one. What are we sure is going to happen 2 days later?
Oh, man, she could be so sore. She's going to get out and be able to walk. Yeah.
Would you rather have a situation where you send her a message the next morning after the workout saying, hey, in a day or two, you're going to be super sore. Here's a couple things to do. Or wait until she texts you or calls you and says, Jess, I think I'm dying. I've never felt this pain before. It's in every joint in my body and every muscle. I'm pretty sure I have, I looked on the internet, I have rhabdomyolysis. Like, you don't have that. You're just sore. But if you were to send her that text and she thinks, well, thanks, Jess, but I'm not that sore now. But then she wakes up the next morning, she perceives you to be A, an expert, and B, someone who's so caring that you eliminate the problems before they happen. So if we go to that new patient exam, if you're somebody who's in, like, say, an office building, I know a lot of folks that you say in Toronto, right? It's a downtown urban area, tons of medical practice on the 12th floor, 16th floor. Okay. Let me ask you this. Are you making it clear where your person should park? Are you making it clear what floor you're on? And when I come out of the elevator, should I turn right or left? Because I'm sure you've had that annoying experience where you go in an elevator and then you come out and you're at a hotel or something. You're like, walk halfway down the hall and you realize, oh crap, the numbers go the other way. These little things, if you send a text message before the visit and say, hey, Jess, by the way, we're on the 12th floor. Be sure to take the blue elevators up. And when you get out, turn left. We're about halfway down the hall on your right. Those little things are just these little deposits into our trust account, essentially. And it does well. If you've ever lived in an urban area, how about I have some clients down in San Diego. If you park on the wrong side, like you park on one side of the street, you will get towed before you're out of your visit with your acupuncturist, right? That's not a trust builder. But instead, if they send a picture and maybe it's even Google Maps and you just circle like park in these spots, they're safe. Again, it's those little things that tell people, hey, I care and I care enough. You can trust me because I'm guiding you through this process. So you think back to like the Star Wars movies. How does Luke end up trusting Yoda? Is Yoda teaches him little things along the way and then demonstrates a couple times. Oh yeah, you want me to lift the X-Wing fighter? I'll do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he trusts him to change his lifestyle and go attack the Death Star.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. It makes sense. And as you're describing these different scenarios, I mean, we've all been there, right? And one of the things that I notice in those, as a practitioner, I'm pretty consistently evaluating my patient experience when I go to see other
Yeah.
practitioners from my own learning experience. Like, what could I do better? But one of the things I notice is when I do go to somebody's place, and I'm the type of person who getting somewhere on time, I'm like 10 minutes early all the time because it's stressful for me, right? So I really like to be early. And every little obstacle adds to that. So by the time I actually get into the room, I'm sometimes wired, like if parking isn't clear or if I don't know, like you said, you go down the hallway. So it's not only trust too, it sounds like you're making it so by the time they actually get into the room, not only have you built trust, but you've also created an emotionally safe space where you've eliminated a lot of those pre-existing frustrations. Because when I have
Right.
those, sometimes I'm downright pissed off. Like I'm like, I don't want to be
Absolutely.
here. I don't even want to be here. This
Oh,
was such.
the worst is when they have some expectation of you that nobody along the way shared. And I want to yell. I want to be like, I'm sorry, I'm your customer. You knew that you needed my insurance card and that you would not treat me without that. But you never, ever, ever sent a message, hey, saying you absolutely need your insurance card. I got one, like I can think back, I had a pulmonologist and it was like, please bring your insurance card. I forgot it. I showed up. They refused to treat me. And I'm like, all right, well, now we have a battle.
Yeah.
Because you made a sideways suggestion about it. And now I drove 25 minutes over here, blocked out my schedule, and I'm going to drive 25 minutes home. If you think for a second I'm going to reschedule this appointment, you are out of your mind. And she's like, well, we'll have to charge you. I was like, lady, I'll burn this place to the ground before I reschedule my appointment with you. Like, I'm offended at my core. And if I were to go into that pulmonologist at that point, do you think he's going to get any of the scary information out of me? I don't want to reveal anything because it's now, like you said, it's not a safe space. It's a now threatening environment that overlays the scheduling department. It overlays the clinical care. It overlays the discharge. It overlays everything. And I think, as you said, nobody's talking about this. And I think that these issues are overwhelming so many of our patients. And I want to make something clear. Remember, patients, there's no monolith of how all of our patients are, right? It's like 20% really perceive a certain aspect. So I'll use this. Like 20% of your patients are really where almost all of your Google reviews have come from. That's just a rule that Google has, right? And 20% of your clients in all forms of healthcare feel embarrassed to even think about reviewing any service. They're like, I don't review anybody. It's embarrassing. I don't like my name being out there, whatever. And then the remaining 60% are probably between those two, right? 20% of your clients are scared. They're overwhelmed. They really need reassurance. And the nightmare scenario for me is, what if within that 20% is that false negative? Sorry, that person that keeps telling you, no, it's fine. And they're a raging red flag monster and you can't dig it out of them, right? That's when we have those problems. And before I move on, I want to tell you, when you said you like getting there early, Google recently said that for medical appointments of all types, dentists, chiropractors, MDs, everybody, that it's reported like 22% of people of Medicare age will drive by the office days before their visit to just get a feel for it. So they'll physically drive. Where should I park? Where should I do this? Where should I do that? And I think that's a sign. So let's say a quarter of your patients are doing that, but this is also the same people that are the most experienced in medicine. Remember, at Medicare age, you're starting to engage in healthcare a lot. So the learned behavior becomes, I should drive over and figure out what it's like before my first visit. The learned behavior isn't, hey, I've done this 74 times in the last 2 years. I can, you know what I mean? Like, they're not looking at reps as a confidence builder. They're looking at bad experience and going, I'm just going to drive by on Sunday before my Tuesday appointment. It's fine. You know?
Right. That tells me it's common enough to have bad experiences that's the reinforced behavior, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I hope people hear that. So again, that's why I use the grandma test. How could you get your grandma into your office without giving her any, I would say for me, where my last office was, I'd take a picture of the outside because it's got 2 entrances and only one of them really makes it easy to get to my office. The other side is like the back entrance for workers like me. The second thing is, how many times have you pulled into the parking lot at your office? Like literally 1,000 times, right? But this person's pulling in for the first time, So we just got to honor those things. And in doing so, your question was about building trust. I think if we feed them upstream, huge amounts of trust are built.
Yeah. And in that process, so I think communication I genuinely believe it's one of the most important skills that we can develop as practitioners.
Sing it from the mountaintops, Jess.
Yeah,
right.
Technical skills are relatively simple, in my opinion. Like, regardless of the modality, by the time you've made it through your education, that's the point. You got the technical skills down, right? It's not that challenging. But things like communication, so unbelievably essential. So when it comes to this idea of communicating, of course, now we've got a variety of different ways that we could do so. Email, of course, video calls, great. And now I want to dwell on text messages for a second. And the reason why is I've made that mistake in the past of giving out my cell number and texting with patients. And the next thing you know, I'm getting a million texts, and I don't want to have like 2, 3 different numbers, right? I don't want to deal with different SIMs. So I have felt in the past that giving my patients the ability to text me is asking for 2 a.m. calls, or not calls, but text messages saying, hey, I'm feeling I didn't sleep tonight. Can I reschedule? So how do we solve that problem, right? If we're talking about texting people and letting them know this type of information, how do we do so without maybe having to keep a separate business phone? Or is that the solution?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm going to expand your question. How about for people under the age of 30 or under 25, where they perceive in safety, they perceive messaging through a third-party app as a safe zone, and they don't want to let you yet use their cell phone number. So for example, if I'm online dating, I'm not giving my cell phone out willy-nilly, but I will let you message me through the match.com or whatever, right? In the same regard, how about if patients are seeing you on Instagram? How do you handle that? The reason I bring this all up is we have a framework for communication that we call it the PATCH, P-A-T-C-H, after Patch Adams. P is always be clear on your patient's goals, not your goals for treatment, but the patient's goals. A is always provide autonomy. T is tailor communication methods. Like if you're talking to a kid, you get down to their level. It's like tailoring the communication, right? C is always remember communication basics, use their name, shake their hand, make eye contact. And H is default to humility or humanize the experience. Like, don't forget to be a human along the way. So when it comes to the T, tailoring communication strategies, and we're talking about building trust, have you ever sent a message or replied to a message let's say you got a text message, you reply, and then it comes back, this inbox is not monitored. Please email our office at this time, right? Now, let's say it's something you're talking about your power bill or you bought a mattress or something, right? But at that moment, do you trust that provider or the provider of the service, the contractor, or the business? Do you trust them more or less?
Oh, less, yeah.
Why is that? It's a weird psychology, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like the autonomy, like they're forcing you to play their game, right? And instead, what we should do is we should tailor our communication to the way you contact me. So, for example, if you text me as a patient, I should email you back.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's not crazy, right? But however, what if you send me a Facebook message and I already have your phone number? What should I do?
Yeah, it gets a bit tricky, but it seems to me you'd stick to the same platform.
Right. Let the patient dictate it. I mean, that's almost law, right? Like PIPEDA laws and HIPAA laws are like, let the patient dictate the protection of their information, right? I think
Mhm.
it's always driven by the patient. So if they did Facebook Messenger, do it that way. All that is to say, we should have a broad range of ways to communicate, and most EHRs do one method of communication, which is email, right? Or they send like one-way text messages, which are like announcements. They're not really communication, right?
Mhm.
So then, okay, fine. Let's do what Jess says, and we'll get an office cell phone, right? And now somebody has to take it home. Somebody has to answer. And it's a pain in the butt. Well, with current technologies, like I don't want to be too self-promotional, but like with trust-driven care, we can have a phone number for the office, and any user of the system can send messages from that, receive messages, and make phone calls from a single number, which is the business number, which is what you want, because as a business owner, I don't want them necessarily to build a relationship with Josh or Jess. What I want them to build a relationship with is my office, because Jess may move on to open his own place. He may move back to Michigan, where his family lives. Like you know what I mean? Like, so having that number also establishes trust with the business and that number to your patients, right? So that's great. But as you said, people don't play by your rules, right? Like they want to ask questions when they want. And so we've come up with a solution for that. And this is common with a lot of different communication platforms. But if somebody calls, it's not crazy that they get a voicemail, right? Because what you're saying is, hey, you call and I want to do something for you. I don't want the phone to just ring into oblivion, because that lowers that trust level. What we do is we have what's called a missed call text back function. And so what happens is, if I call your office after hours, as soon as I hang up, they get a text that says, hey, sorry we missed your call. This is, Engaged Spine and Joint Center. How can we help? Right? If you really want to juice it up, since you're a Jane user, you would say, hey, this is Engaged is my clinic name. Engaged Spine and Joint Center. Sorry I missed your call. Someone will get back to you in the morning, right? We're kind of setting that forward pace of when communication will happen. Until then, if you need to book, here's our link. And you just put your Jane booking link there, which 80-20 rule, 80% of your patients, if they've already been to your practice, might go, that's actually why I was calling. I'll just book through that. If not, you can respond, and then they can also ask a question via text, right? Like, because it's not socially weird. If I text you, it's not socially weird for you to respond in 2 hours, right? I mean, just socially, like with your mom, with your family, it's normal. But the flip side is, if I call you right now, you got to pick up right now. You don't have a choice. That's the only way calls work, right? So texting has this kind of opened up timeline where it's okay. So we do all those things so that the patient does get some response, or future patient, hey, we heard you, we know you called, and we'll get back to you in the morning. But it also works for the tired, overworked, beat up therapist that doesn't want to freaking answer the damn phone after 7 p.m., So
As I'm hearing you describe this, I'm actually feeling myself getting pretty excited, because what you're talking is my language as an online business owner, right? Like, so I do continuing education online. I've got a couple other online businesses on the go. And without a good CRM system, customer relation management system, my world would fall apart. I've got automations for everything. Like, if somebody sends a message to my Facebook or Instagram, anything, my system tracks all of that. Yes. And even if there's a keyword, it will send them into a certain automation that will say, this person's done this. So in the world of sales,
can we pause right there? Yeah. Here's what I see, Jess. You have online business, and so you're familiar with these terms. I have an online business, so I'm familiar with terms. But let's define these for people so they understand, because I feel like, in some sense, healthcare is sitting in last century about these communication strategies. Yes. When you talk to people that are doing certain businesses, they're like, how would you ever operate without a CRM? How would you ever operate without this? And I'm going, baby, you people don't know how low tech healthcare still is, right?
It's shocking.
I had a client the other day that said, I can't even say it's out loud. We signed up with Jane, and so we're recording this early August. We signed up with Jane, and good news, mid-June, we no longer do any paper charting since mid-June.
Of 2024.
Yes.
Woo!
They were celebrating. the fact that in mid-June of 2024, they stopped paper charting. And what do
Okay.
you say to that person? Like, hey, I want to give you a hug. Like, welcome, friend. This is the new century. we've got
That's it.
we've got these things called airplanes. Like, it's an awesome world.
Yeah.
They genuinely felt like that was an accomplishment, and I certainly don't want to make fun of them or anything. Like,
No,
what have you been doing for the last decade? But that's not a crazy thought.
not at
Okay.
all.
So now let's go to CRM. What is a CRM? Just for those listening, there are tons of these. And if you've ever heard of companies, I used to use one called Infusionsoft or Keep, HubSpot. I'm trying to think of others. Active Campaign, MindBody. These are common ones. And what CRM stands for is Customer Relationship Management Software. It's a customer relationship management. So it sees like, oh, Jess bought this course for $199 on July 5th. 3 days later, he upgraded to the VIP level course for $99 on July 7th. He got this email. He replied to it. Like, it just tracks all that kind of information. So for those healthcare providers, I think one of the things is our EHR kind of functions like a messy, half-assed CRM in some regards. Like, when did Jess schedule? How much did he pay? Like, those are commonalities. But they're not really good for managing the people that aren't EHRs are not really meant for, and they're not really good at managing when people aren't yet patients. Right? I don't know how you handle it, but the way I handle my Jane account is like, unless I've done an exam and you have a diagnosis, you're not going into Jane.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you came to a workshop and I'm enticing you to become a patient, or like I like working with golfers, I'm doing some golf stretching class and stuff, that's cool. You ain't going into Jane. Now, if you go, hey, I have low back pain from golf, come on in, fill out your paperwork, I'll put you in Jane. But I think in a lot of healthcare practices, especially as you start like marketing and stuff, there's just hundreds, thousands of people that aren't in your EHR and may never be in your EHR, right? And so that's what a CRM is how do you communicate with those people and track all their behavior? And then you mentioned some other word that I wanted to define.
Automation.
Automation. Keywords. You said
Keywords. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell people what a keyword is, because I think keywords are one of those like secret amazing things.
Yeah. So within the context of healthcare, for example, somebody sends a message to you, whatever, we'll say Instagram, because maybe they saw something you're doing, and they send you a message and it's like, hey, I got this crazy low back pain. It looks like what you're teaching in this Instagram reel would be good. So they send you a message, keyword low back pain. And in the CRM, you can have it set up that if anybody sends you a message with low back pain, they get kind of funneled into this particular communication category. So then if you have an automated response set up, which, like in the sales world, everybody's got automated responses set up, then the automated response is something like, hey, like back pain, that certainly sounds something. You know what? Here's a link to some back pain resources I have for you.
Right.
Or if somebody else sends it and you're doing a neck thing, it's like, oh man, yeah, my neck hurts like that all the time. Keyword, neck, it sends them in a different direction. So it makes it so these automated communications are so specifically tailored to whatever the millions of potential people who are seeing your online content and marketing material are going to be asking you about. It takes a lot of pressure off you as well.
Right. And another common one, like if you have like a web chat widget on your website, like ask questions and stuff, that's something that we do all the time with like Kendall, our mutual friend Kendall did that. And literally on her website, you can see like book here, book now are two buttons. And between those are the web chat. And people are asking questions like, how do I book an appointment? You're like, please God, just look up or down. But for those listening, you could set up a keyword for the word book, because that's a schedule, appointment. Like if they use any of those words that kind of are the same thing, it sends them, hey, use a message that says, hey, it's real easy. We use online booking through this site. Click here and sign up, right? And then you just put your Jane booking link in there. You got to kind of think through, like, you're Canadian, I'm American, check. You might spell it with a Q and I spell it with a CK, but so you got to think through those things. Or like, would you say book an appointment, or schedule an appointment, or book a visit? Like, you have to think through what are those different things. But
Yeah.
You can add all those in. But yeah.
It's really cool that excuse me, that what you're creating is in fact a CRM system for unless I'm mistaken, but it really sounds like that's the goal
Yeah.
because whenever I shift my focus, right, because I've got my online business and then I'm going to be working with some patients. So I shift from my CRM platform over to Jane. And part of me is like, why can't I do I love it. Like it's an amazing system as far as EMRs are concerned, genuinely think top notch. But one
Yeah.
of the things that I find I miss is this way to communicate with my clients and track many different things, not just their appointments and the payments that they've given me, but I want to know how often somebody's gone to my website and not booked. I want to know that bit of information because if they're coming from a website and I see they've been there 10 times and they haven't booked, what are they doing there?
Yeah.
I'm very curious. Like, what am I failing to do on my website that's preventing them from booking, right? There's
Yeah.
so many things. So it's cool that you're developing and have, from the sounds of it, developed some pretty comprehensive software that
Yeah.
does CRM stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. We have that ability. We have that. And I'm glad that you see the power of that because
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like getting you used to a CRM. And I don't use the word CRM, although that's what we are, because nobody in healthcare really knows what that is.
Yeah.
You're like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
we're sending moon juice. And you're like, I have no idea what that is, but it sounds cool.
Yeah.
And I tell people, um, in some regard, imagine if like you're a 5-year-old little kid and it's Christmas morning and I take you out to the garage and I go, hey, I got you a bike and I'm holding the bike up. It has no kickstand. And I let go and you like watch the bike like fall over. You're like, what the hell's this thing? I'm like, you're going to love it. It's so much more efficient to get around the neighborhood and go to the park and go to grandma and grandpa's. And you're like, that thing literally just fell over and you're telling me I'm going to ride it. It's like, yeah. And then you hop on it and you fall over and you skin your knee. You're like, this thing sucks. Like you keep,
Mm-hmm.
and then you finally get over that hump and you start riding. And I don't know if you had the experience when you were a kid of like riding a bike. To me, that was like the first experience of complete freedom. I'm
Totally.
like, you're telling me I can go to the store and back before my mom even realizes I'm gone? I can go get a Hostess fruit pie or a scoop of ice cream and my mom wouldn't even, or my mom would say like, go play for a while. And I could, now Jimmy's house is a possible play site because it's a mile away, whereas there's no way I'd walk there and back in the time I have. So a CRM, you need to get the wheels turning and you need to get a few
Mm-hmm.
people in there and a few people hitting your website and a few people responding to messages and a few people getting an automated message and all that. And then you go, oh my God, how would I ever survive without this? I have no idea how I lived without this. But those who have never used it, they're going, dude, it sounds like a lot of work. It sounds like this. It sounds like that.
And fair enough.
Yeah.
It is a lot
Yeah.
of work to set them up. I definitely don't want to anybody who's listening. I don't want to be like, oh, this
Yeah.
is easy peasy because there is a lot of upfront
Right.
work. But after 6 months, let alone years later, that upfront work seems like
Yeah.
nothing.
I want to entice people to explore this idea and, of course, explore it with our software. But let me ask you
Yeah.
this, Jeff. Yeah. Shocking, right? Let me ask you this. In your experience, like all the stuff you do with a CRM, if you've taken the time to set this up, one of the things I don't think people realize is for like an online education provider, all this automation, if none of that could be automated, how many people do you think you need to employ to deliver courses, open up access, give those things if it couldn't be automated?
Oh, geez. I honestly couldn't come up with a number. Like if we talk a course launch, probably 20,
Okay.
25.
Here's the reason I'm asking. I'm guessing you've owned a clinic, right?
Oh yeah.
And you have your service providers, the acupuncturist, the massage therapist, the ones that's the only service you get paid for. And every person at the front desk is a great for patient experience. I don't want to discount that. However, they're what you would call sunk cost, right? Every dollar you pay them doesn't actually get reimbursed by patients, right? I mean, obviously they assist that, but how many clinics have you gone to, Jess, where like I've had this experience. I'm looking around going, there's 4 people here. There's no reason they don't need 4 people here. Like my gut instinct is they're just so inefficient. They have trying to make up for it with bodies. But when you own a clinic, what's the number one cost? It's people,
Oh,
right?
it's people.
Yeah. I mean, your rent is a big cost, but it's never as precious. And you can pay your rent a couple days late. You can't pay your people a couple days late. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, My point being, if you take that idea of like how much labor is done by your CRM and apply it back to your clinic 5 years ago, 10 years ago, how many people did you hire? And looking back, knowing what you know now, how many would you say like, oh yeah, I could have had half that staff, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how to calculate that. And I think people who haven't experienced it don't realize that. But, like yesterday, there was a huge dip in the stock market in the States. So there's some concerns about the economy. The I don't know about in Canada, but U.S. reimbursement rates and insurance are not going up. They're not like, hey, we found a bunch of money, we want to share it with you. I've never got that letter from United Healthcare. I'll be totally honest, right? And so you look at, okay, well, if I want to end up with more money next year than I made this year, you either got to make more money or reduce expenses or both. And reducing expenses, I think you're never going to save your way through paper clips and fewer highlighters to a significant index. But if you don't have to have one more employee, can you do that? But I don't want to say and then incur a crappy patient experience. Maintain the same level, but have less staff. So I would love your opinion since you've kind of built some stuff out.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I find that it's not only how do you save money, because if you have a good CRM software, it will save you a tremendous amount of time and effort and energy in the end, therefore saving you a lot of money. But additionally, it also has the capacity to reach more. So on a normal day, like every single day, I'm getting between 5, 10, sometimes 30 or more emails coming into my system. And I'm not doing that work. So I'm getting customers coming in. So not only am I saving money, but not having to hire staff to go out and do this for me, I'm not spending my time, which is valuable, doing it myself, but I'm having a system that's in place, and it's really tactful and saving money and making more money simultaneously. So for myself, as we get further into this conversation, it baffles my mind that this hasn't been applied to healthcare and wellness practices before, because the number one issue that I see with clinic owners, even solo practitioners, particularly in the beginning, how do I get new clients? How do I grow my business? And you grow your business by getting more clients. And how do you get more clients? Well, it turns out knocking on doors just doesn't work the way it used to, right?
Right. Yeah. And the other thing is, when you talk about that patient experience, one thing I love about CRMs and automating certain systems. So my friend Ryan that I told you passed away, he had this great line, and he said, he was actually really into automation. And he said, remember, you can never automate a hug. And it struck out to me. There are certain times, as we talk about this conversation about automation, there are certain times you should absolutely not automate things. Absolutely. So I'll give you an example. When you go to your mom's house for Mother's Day, you should not automate the card you get her. You should not automate getting her flowers. Hell, you shouldn't automate going to her house. Like, yes, you could just deliver flowers through some service. Don't do that. You're a horrible person. Like, don't go to your mom's house. So I just use that as a plain example. And there's certain things that you shouldn't automate. For example, you shouldn't fully automate the message that goes out the night of the initial patient exam. I think the best thing you should do is have a system that always sends a message to every new patient, but it includes some sort of information that they know there's no way my provider knows this without having listened, right? So if I know that, Jess, do you have a dog? I always ask people this. Okay. No. Do you have a cat? Do you have any pets?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cat.
What's the cat's name?
Artie.
Okay. So imagine you come into my office at 10 a.m. and I send you a message, and you get this message at 7 p.m. It says, hey, Jess, it was a pleasure meeting you. I just want to check in and see how you're doing. By the way, give Artie a scratch for me. Right?
Yeah.
When you add that little bit of information that cannot be fully automated, what is the perception of that patient and your ability to listen?
Right. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Is such a valuable thing, but there does come a point when, and on the terms, continuing to use this term of sales, the customer journey, when it goes from a potential customer to an actual patient, the customer journey changes, and the way you interact with them and communicate with them changes. So I certainly appreciate you pointing that out.
And one of the tricks there, you can't automate it, but you can partially do it. We have a little setting, and if you don't use our system, just find one that does this. You can schedule when you want the text to go out. So when I finish a new patient exam at 10 a.m., I write the message then. I say delivered at 7 p.m. So I say, hey, Jess, because you're super fresh in my mind, and I want you to be impressed with it. Yeah. And by 10:15, I've completely forgotten about you and Artie and everything else.
Yeah.
But at 7 p.m., you're at home with your partner, and you get a message, and you're like, oh, my God, this person cares.
Yeah.
And that's great sales. But what it also is now there's a much higher chance that you're going to come in and go, hey, I know you asked me about numbness in my genitals, and I didn't want to tell you yesterday, but yeah, that's happened for 3 months. Good. Mm-hmm. I'm going to order an MRI right now.
Right.
You know, and I'm sure you've had that experience with patients where 4 weeks in, 6 weeks in, they're like, oh, by the way, Jess, I don't want to tell you this when we started, but I do have urinary incontinence. Or I didn't want to tell you this, but I have been noticing blood, you know, when I pee. Like, and I think what that is, because you've had this experience, right? Like,
oh yeah,
good reveals. I think that what that is that's a sign that person now has gotten over kind of that line of trust with you. And they're like, now that I trust you, I want you to know this information. The other version of it is when they're getting some medical procedure that has absolutely nothing to do with your profession. And they're like, listen, Jess, I'm getting dental implants. I want to know, who do you think I should go to? It comes out of left field, and you're like, I don't know. I don't know anything about dentistry. But I think what they're saying is, I now trust you as my medical director. Like, you are my trusted resource. So they just want to screen everything against you.
Right.
Anyways, all that is to say, you can't automate everything, but you can make things easier by scheduling them out or whatever. There was something else I was going to say. Oh, yeah. And when we go back to the patient experience, because you brought that up, and I think one of the power of automation that doesn't get the respect it deserves is when you decide to automate your process, like, right, your first week with, if I buy a course from you, like, what emails do I get? Well, the first thing you have to do as a business owner is decide what really matters. Like, what are the messages we're going to send? And you systematize it. There's nothing worse in healthcare of, like, I go to see you and I'm like, oh my God, my experience was great and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to send my mom. She's been dealing with some leg pain as well. And she goes, and I say, Mom, how was it? You know, you went to Jess's office. And she's like, it was horrible. Nobody paid attention. They didn't lay me down. They didn't do this. And I'm like, no, they spent hours with me. You know what I mean? Like, that disparity that happens between the office I went to when you were kind of had some extra time, and then my mom goes and you're super busy or something. When we automate things, we have to decide what's going to happen exactly. And then the system makes sure that happens every time. Like, if it's really important every time to send an email with your origin story, like, how'd you become an acupuncturist, or how'd you become a massage therapist or whatever? Why'd you decide to leave your last employer? They just didn't believe in the care I wanted, and so I did this. If you make sure every one of your patients gets that origin story, I guarantee you, for those listening, a couple of them will comment on it in their, not everyone, but a couple of them will comment on it and say how much it connected with them. Well, guess what? You just built the trust level up between you.
Yeah. I appreciate now how you're tying it back together, right? I mean, we've been chatting for almost an hour, so it seems like a great way to do so is ultimately this whole process, everything we're talking about, forms of communication, setting up automations, and using a good CRM. Ultimately, it's great for sales and it saves you time and you make more money with it. But at the end of the day, the real point, from what I'm understanding, the real point is to communicate with your clients in such a way consistently, without flagging on those days when you feel like garbage, consistently communicate them in a high value way that builds enough trust that your clients actually tell you really the things, all the red flag things, the things that are really important for you to know as a practitioner, which at the end of the day leads to better clinical outcomes, which is ultimately what we're all after, right?
Right. Yeah. And I would say you're 100% right. Clinically, we avoid those false negatives, which we know that's false positives. I always joke, false positives are billing issues, right? Oh, we got to run this extra test and you got to pay for it, but really it was nothing. But false negatives, those are the things that really kill people, right? Like, oh, you don't have cancer when in fact you do. And that's what trust really eliminates, are those false negatives. Now, that's clinically, right? But if there's somebody that's like super stressed out about money, and they're like, I don't really, I'm not concerned with that. Like I've had those stages in my practice where I'm like overwhelmed with paying the bills, and it's totally respectable. Remember that trust also improves your business. So for example, if you recommend a care plan to me of 20 visits and I trust you and I trust what you're saying, I'm going to sign up for the 20 visits. It doesn't come off as like, well, just trying to make money off me. No. Hey man, I trust you. That's what you say I need. That's what I need. And the amount, hey, it's $115 a session. I trust you. That's a fair amount, right? And how many providers do you know that are complaining about like, oh, I have all these patients, they drop off their care plans. They don't complete their care plans. They never fall through. Well, have you ever examined, like, do they trust that number is true and accurate, and they trust you to put that together? When you see those problems, I think just swim upstream to like the previous few visits, and you can trace a lot of these back to that first visit. But yeah, like that builds your business as well. And if they trust you as the only provider, like you said, like you have those patients that 6 or 8 weeks into care go, oh, I just want you to know, like, I do have this. Well, who do you think those same people that are coming to you with this intimate information, who do you think they're going to refer their friends and family to when it comes up? There's only one choice at that point. But when they're in a sea of people they just don't trust or don't know, now it's just, roll the dice, baby. Could be you, could be someone else.
Yeah.
And so it when we get it right, it feeds both sides of the house. Like I don't want to sit here and think like, oh, you should do this just to build trust and have perfect outcomes. That's a great part of it. You also need to have a healthy business,
Yeah.
But you can't have one or the other. Both are both at the same time is the best deal.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And as we kind of tie a bow on our conversation, I'd love to ask you a question that I got a hunch. I know what you're going to say, but it's the question I ask all the time. And it's, in your experience and opinion, and with everything you do, if you're to sort of like really summarize it to the most essential thing, what do you think it is that makes a practitioner successful?
I would say three skills are often out of balance, and if you were to balance them, you would be wildly successful. I don't think you should ever stop getting better at diagnosis. Even if you don't treat anybody you diagnose, neurologists, they're not known for treatment at all, right? They're always diagnosis only. But the more accurate they get, the better the patient feels. So never stop getting better at diagnosis, regardless of your license. Number 2 is never stop improving your treatment skills. And as a little asterisk, that also means when you need to get really clear about when you need to refer somebody out and who you're going to refer them to. Not just like, oh, you need a cardiologist. No. What type of cardiologist and what's the specific condition, right? But if you're a treating physician, like a chiropractor, massage therapist, acupuncturist, get super freaking good at treatment, like wicked good, but never get so good at treatment that you forget to get good at diagnosis. And I see that a lot. Like chiropractors are known for they're polishing up their skills. I'm like, you're treating the wrong thing. That is, it's not a skill issue. And then finally, the one that I think we started this conversation with that gets forgotten is communication. Work every day on getting better at your communication, which our system can help you. But I think it's like, I always say, like, if you don't understand bookkeeping, QuickBooks ain't going to save you, right? Fundamentally understand communication. And what that means is when you're explaining something to your patients and their eyebrows raise and they nod, write down what that was. You know what I mean? Like if you're explaining facet syndrome and all of a sudden they go, yeah, I get it. Whatever the hell you said, please write it down because it connected. It made sense to the non-skilled people, right? Work on the way you deliver information, or when should you say something? How do you make that person, like in our world, low back pain, how do you make them feel empowered they're going to get better, but still respect these tissues are kind of fragile. Like, let's not piss them off anymore. I'm not saying you're fragile. I'm just saying these specific muscle and ligament fibers are fragile. Let's protect them. How do you explain that to somebody to say it's okay to get back to normal life, but it's not okay to get to crazy stuff? You know what I mean? Like, it's tough. how do you talk to a runner and say, like, you can't run, but I need you to work out? And they're like, yeah, that means running. I'm like, no, but how do you say that? Well, when you come up with that delivery method that gets them to nod their head and look at you and looking in the eye and fulfill, remember that. And I think we forget communication is such a big part of treatment, and it's such a big part of healthcare. So whatever you're best at, I don't know, Jess, what do you feel best at? Communication, diagnosis, or treatment? What do you feel like you're the skill at right now?
I think right now, probably communication is my strong point.
Okay. Yeah. Then my challenge would be, if that's a 9 out of 10, work to get treatment up to a 9 out of 10. Work to get diagnosis up to a 9 out of 10. For me, I struggle with communication all the time. I mean, you can verify that with my wife and my marriage counselor. It ain't my strong suit. I know all the research in the world about it, but I struggle to do it. But I feel really good about diagnosis. I need to polish my treatment skills. Like clinically, like that's the thing that's out of balance right now for me. And I would say, if you do that, you're going to know what you need to take for your next CE course. You're going to know where you need to focus. And it's exciting, right? If I said, Jess, like the next year, just get better at diagnosis, you go, oh, well, I don't need that. I don't need that. I don't need that. But man, that public speaking course would be amazing, right? Or whatever. So,
that's wonderful.
Yeah, that's kind of my thought. And it's a lifetime pursuit. It's exciting. You'll never be as good as you want to be, but just focus on those.
That's awesome. Thanks, Josh. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to put all the links to all the different amazing things you do, because we only talked about really one of the slices of the Josh business pie. So I'll put all the links in the show notes. But is there anything you'd like to add? Anything you feel like we left out before we wrap up our chat?
Sure. A little bit of self-promotion. But if you're really serious about patient communication and you're really serious about your patient experience, and you're listening to this, I'd love to invite you. We do our live patient experience workshops here in Las Vegas. I'd love to have anybody show up. And what that is we spend 2 hours just going over the research and what do patients ask for? What do they want? And then once you have that, we can build out the solution to that in trust-driven care or whatever communication platform you use. But I would just invite you to get in the room with other people, because one thing that's amazing to me is we get providers of all disciplines, mental health, acupuncture, med spas. And for example, med spas, there's never an idea they're going to use insurance, right? They never consider that. And at the same time, they have lifetime value of customers like in the $25,000 to $50,000 range. And I'm like a chiropractor going, well, if I can, have a lifetime value of $1,500, I'm doing good. And they're like, I wouldn't roll out of bed for $1,500, But just hearing the different approaches and what you think is a rule in your profession and what I think is a rule, and people look at each other and go, I never thought about that way, Jess. That's an incredible idea. I want to do it that way. Our 2-day live events are amazing for that. So
brilliant. That's amazing. I'll make sure to have a link for that too in the show notes.
Okay. And if you want to come to one, Jess, I'd love to have you as my guest, man. Experience it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah.
Take a weekend in Las Vegas and yeah.
Okay, you got me sold. Hard sell on that one. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Josh. This has been an absolutely fantastic conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Jess. Love what you're doing.
Thanks.